join us in just a moment to break it down. Join us. Let's bring in Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel. Thank you so much. Mr. Emmanuel, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Shall I say Happy New Year to you?
Yeah, Happy New Year. Yes, for the first time we're talking on TV this year. So, but let's get to the numbers. I know you've always had problems with the MBS's number, and I know you navigate around perhaps the yield curve when you look at how the monetary policy authority or monetary authority in this sense literally chase the inflation numbers when it was double digits in the region of the 30s and high 20s, keep increasing basis point until it got to about almost 28, region about 27 point something. But now we've seen the rebasing of both the GDP and the CPI, and we got about 25%, and now we're talking 15. In fact, right now we're talking food inflation at 8, but the monetary authorities seem to be watching still closely since all of this has happened. But what do you make of these new numbers? Good things happening? Good numbers? Okay, oh dear. So we'll try and reestablish connection with Kelvin Emmanuel, the Economist, joining us from our Abuja studio. So break down some of these numbers for us so that we have an understanding of what these numbers really mean. So primarily, inflation doesn't necessarily talk about the actual price. It just looks at the rate of change of those prices, either north or south of those numbers. That means whether it's coming up or coming down. So it's a volatile number in that sense, to see how we can. Okay, Mr. Manuel, I understand you. Okay, I thought that was
Mr. Jeffrey, don't worry, you're not alone. It's quite interesting because this, I mean, we've not had single digits for 10 years, right? So
yes, for about 10 years.
If you do like a subtraction, simple subtractions, is about mid 2015, so much later. So it basically says for me, and I will reiterate that, you see, what is synonymous with 2015? Yeah, that's when the APC came to power. And a lot of people have looked back at the previous administration and they have a long list of things that they wish the government had done better. So this is almost like, not even factory reset, just going back 10 years to now start again from where we were then. But hey, things have since changed. Countries have moved very fast. But Jeffrey, Emmanuel's back.
Mr. Emmanuel, for a moment we lost connection. So back to you. I hope you got my question, by the way.
Yes, I did. Geoff, good morning. Kayode, good morning to you. I was going to say that, when we're having this conversation, it's always important to give historical perspective to our audience listening so they understand how we got to where we are today and what CBN has done over the last 2.5 years to try to reverse the situation. There was one major event within the last decade that really catalyzed the inflation numbers, which are wartime inflation numbers we've seen in Nigeria, and that event was the abuse of Ways and Means Section 38. And that cycle really accelerated in 2019, where you had about 17 trillion that was pumped into the economy, and it didn't have real sector production that was accelerating as fast as money supply was injected into the system. And because there was no real sector productivity to match the increase in money supply, inflation was the natural result. And 2022 accelerated it further, where
Oh dear. Well, we'll try and re-establish connection with Mr. Emmanuel, just trying to give us a background onto what we're dealing with. Mr. Emmanuel, we understand you're back. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. Apologies. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So between 2019 and 2022, the CBN advanced the federal government of Nigeria the equivalent of 53 billion US dollars. All of that cash that was pumped into the system really jacked up inflation in Nigeria because the real sector productivity did not, was not growing as fast. And it went into
Well, we'll try and sort this out as soon as possible. I'll get the thoughts because it's important that we lay the foundation as to what we're dealing with in terms of numbers. Because I understand the challenges of the average Nigerian, and your challenges are valid. So there was where we were all here when prices were low across board, whether it's energy, food, and all of that. Well, the administration came and said the wage bill was too much. They were paying a lot in terms of wage bill, from electricity subsidy to PMS subsidy to subsidy for FX. There were all kinds of subsidy, and they felt like, look, we have to liberalize trade, we have to take away subsidy so we can taper inflation and boost productivity in terms of employment. In terms of productivity boosting, we can argue about that for another day. So that's why the government took, in their view, the hard decision of doing two major policy shifts, removing subsidy from PMS, partially removing subsidy from energy, which is electricity. That's why we have band A and the remaining band. Also took out subsidy from FX, harmonizing. It was a managed float. I really don't know whether it's still a managed float till now. But now from that jump to almost 2,000 naira per dollar, we now have about 1,350. So there were some gains. The reserve has got into 49 billion. I could quote all of these numbers because we're familiar. We look at these numbers every other day. But the average Nigerian is saying, okay, when will it get to me? I remember when we were talking to one of the statisticians at the MBS, he said, look, he understands that the only way Nigerians will feel the impact of the policy shift will be when prices significantly reduce to a point where perhaps go back to where it was, or wage increase significantly to meet the current reality. Because one day I went to buy egg. My wife sent me to go get eggs. So I didn't know how much was egg. My head was still around 2015 naira. They told me 250. I was confused for a moment. I went to another, they said 300. I'm like, no, what's going on here? So I always like to use eggs as my test for depreciation in price or reduction in price of goods and services. In fact, there was this noodle we used to buy for 2,500 calorie. I just priced it. They said it was 11,000. I was confused again. I was like, okay. So perhaps that's my own way of measuring, because I understand numbers, but
Which is
practically.
Go to the market more.
I go.
You should do more market runs.
So for the Nigerian wants to see how these prices come back to what they were able to afford. A lot of people can't still afford. So when they hear numbers like this, they're almost upset. But that's why we're bringing the Economist to help us break it down. Mr. Emmanuel, apologies. Technology is not having a good time with us this morning, but we'll make the most of it. Go ahead, please.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So I was saying that towards the end of the last administration, Ways and Means was securitized into a government bond. I think the coupon was anywhere between 9 and 10%, if I'm not mistaken. And you had a situation basically where, as inflation accelerated, the MPC at the CBN raised MPR to match within what they call inflation to interest yield curve. The government could not keep up with its FX wage bill in balance of payment because as at 2022, the CBN was technically insolvent. Even if they don't like to acknowledge it, it owed $7 billion in FX forwards, it owed about $14 billion in FX swaps. It could not meet up with its FX obligations. It didn't even have 3 months of FX to meet with his balance of payment obligations, and the credit line it had with his external asset managers, net asset ratio was in negative. So, you had a situation where they came in and then the difference between the official and black market, which was known as the black market premium, was trading at about 60%. And the government had to take the difficult decision to remove first petrol subsidy, which, even if it was a good decision and I supported it, and I still support the removal today because it has liberalized the midstream and downstream sector, I still do not think that Nigerians are feeling the impact of subsidy removal because the government cannot account for the crude oil barrels that was used under domestic crude intervention stock for crude swap for subsidy. Till today, they can't account for it. And I keep saying it, and I'll say it to the government that they should account to Nigerians where those barrels that was used for petrol subsidy is actually going to today. And then the government collapsed the FX rate to match the black market and the parallel and the official market rate. And the result was that you had stability in the FX market, and the market moved from a managed float to a system where today the market supplies its own FX, except for a few days ago when the CBN announced that it was going to allow FX supply to certain BDCs that had met pre-qualification and to align the parallel and official market rate that was widening for the first time in over a year, And then also electricity subsidy, even if that one is a little more complicated, and MBET, which is the vehicle that the special purpose vehicle government set up to match any fall in what they call final settlement statements, FSS, submitted by GENCOs to market operators, to the market operator to pay the GENCOs. It has created a distortion in the electricity market. So you have FX, then you have petrol. And the two major drivers, the two major drivers of inflation in Nigeria is energy and food. And because Nigeria's supply chain is so exposed, because in my view, from what I've seen, there isn't a lot of enterprise manufacturing in Nigeria. Enterprise manufacturing for the intermediates that are imported for the final consumer manufacturers to produce the commodities that we consume. Nigeria is still exposed to FX risk. So even if the Naira is appreciating marginally, I still feel like you have an undervaluation premium of anywhere around 18 to 20% now. You still have not seen that translation effect where the prices of goods are being revised, even if the MBS is talking about CPI normalization. When you look at that calculation for cost of current year divided by cost of base year times 100, CPI normalization, you still are not seeing the real-time impact. You were talking about the price of egg. And then you look at what goes into the production of egg, the production of feed, maize, soybean, and all kinds of vitamins and amino acids. So you ask yourself, if maize prices and soybean prices have come down from what we used to have it in 2022, why has the price of feeds, poultry feeds to the poultry farmers not come down? And why has it not reflected in the price of chicken and most especially on the price of eggs? So these are the real-time metrics that the statisticians at the Monetary Policy Technical Committee, which is like a secretariat for the Monetary Policy Committee at the Central Bank of Nigeria, they used to do regressive modeling to the numbers they can rely on if they are not going to adjust their API to in my view.
There it goes again for connection. But
not aggressively cutting interest rate like they were aggressively increasing
Mr. Emmanuel,
interest rate in 2020.
Come in quickly because of time. You started by making or by giving a context as to how we got here, and something you said struck me. Maybe to drill deeper on that. That's the previous government with the ways and means and the way it handled the economy. And I recall recently when the Accountant General of the Federation, Mr. Shamseldin Ogunjimi, was before the National Assembly defending the budget. I know the lawmakers were complaining. They said, there are contractors that haven't been paid over 2 trillion naira. MDAs haven't gotten monies that they were meant to get, some of them. And they were saying, come on, what is going on? And, the Accountant General found a wise way to say, well, I can only give what I get. I can't give what I don't have. And he then said, there is no more the ways and means that we used to have then, which he believes is good for the economy. So we're in a situation now where we're reforming to where we were just 10 years ago before the APC came to power. I have to say that because it's factual, it's what data says. But more importantly, these reforms, they sound good, but in actual fact, it's inconveniencing the economy in some sense. If contractors have not been paid, if some of the MDAs aren't getting some of the funds budgeted to them, and then we have some of these issues. So really, when you wait, are the reforms yielding as much fruits as they ought to?
The problem, with Nigeria is not that the principles of economics don't work. It's that politics always comes in the way and tries to distort the principles of economics. And I'll tell you why I said that. If you look at revenue government of if you remove you're not only supposed to save the barrels that was used to pay for subsidy. We should today is right? Where are those barrels? Number two, Section 38 of the CBN Act is very specific about a 5% cap. I said, if you look at the subsidy that was used for petrol, the crude oil barrels that was used for crude oil swap to pay for petrol subsidies, either through direct sale, direct purchase, or vendor financing program that it later operated before it was scrapped. When the government implemented sections 205 of the PIA, and it said we're no longer going to provide under recovery, it meant that those barrels that was used for crude oil swap to pay petrol subsidies were now removed for that purpose. Now, the question we should ask the government is, where are those barrels and why is it not captured in fact? Number one. Number two, the Accountant General, you said the Accountant General talked about ways and means and they are no longer ways and I congratulate Cardozo on this. The fact that he's been very strict with the federal government on refusal to borrow the federal government money, which according to CBN Act says that you cannot borrow more than 5% equivalent of your real revenues for the previous accounting year. So if, for example, the real revenues of the federal government last year, for example, was 10 trillion naira, 5% of that is 500 billion. The law says that the CBN cannot borrow the federal government more than 500 billion for the previous accounting year, and that money has to be paid back within 12 months because the CBN has to close its book, because in accounting they have what they call expected credit losses of 12 months, which means that within 12 months, that interest has to be paid back, which is MPRO plus 3, and the CBN has to regularize its books because it can't carry that interest into a new accounting year. Okay, so you can see that, relying on ways and means as a temporary tool to meet up with deficits in the budget is not a strategy that the CBN supports by having that window. So unless the government ramps up revenue accretion by collecting taxes or by getting money from the oil and gas sector from dividends that is concessionaire NNPC pays to it, then there's a problem. Last year, NLNG did not pay any dividend to NNPC, I believe. The dividends, I didn't see any dividends paid. I don't know where that is coming from. If it's from judgment debts, then LNG has.
Oh dear. Looks like we're not getting the very best of connection this morning. But Mr. Emmanuel, here's what we'll do. We're going to have this conversation proper another time, so we'll get all of the full value, because it's not really nice to have the disruptions. It's a very important conversation around the economy, the figures, what is being done, what has been done, and what we must do better. But Mr. Kevin Emmanuel, we have to thank you for your time and have to do this very soon to ensure we get full value. Thank you, and apologies for all of the glitches. We'll take a quick break now. When we return, we'll talk about former Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai. Well, he's been taken to court now over that interview where he talked about wiretapping. What is happening in court? And what is this petition that has now been written against him, signed by prominent Nigerians? It's a big conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back.